You know, I bought Siege Springer back in 2020, and in the 4 years between then and selling him at TFCon this summer, I never once wrote a review of him. I think that's because there was something bizarrely forgettable about the figure. Something that just made his existence just vanish from your brain the second you stopped looking at him. Which is a bit odd, considering that Springer's whole character is supposed to be Mr. Charisma. When he was introduced in the 1986 animated movie, he was transparently written as a wry Han Solo stand-in, and pretty much very subsequent appearance over the years that has depicted him as a brash, two-fisted hero adventurer who's often in charge of leading the Wreckers, the Autobots' Black Ops Squadron. He's had more than a few figures over the years, but it took a long while before they managed to make a new one that was a proper car, helicopter, robot triple changer, like the G1 original. And that one has been called one of the best Transformers of all time, though it was based on his appearance in IDW's comics. So there was certainly room for an animated accurate version, which is what the Siege one was supposed to be, until it came out and everybody immediately memory holed it. This Studio 86 one feels like a mulligan, an attempt to inject some charisma into a figure that was strangely forgettable. And I mean inject pretty literally, since it's actually an extensive retooling of the Siege Voyager, with extra engineering and accessories sold as a leader class figure. So he has that whole need to justify the inflated price tag too, on top of trying to be like, you know, a good figure. So let's have a look. And I'll be treating him like a new figure since the old one's already sold and I've already forgotten so much about it already, and I just don't understand how that figure did that. The foremost question on my mind, and presumably yours, upon this Springer's reveal was his size. So let's get that out of the way. He's definitely still a Voyager, but he's got some substance to him. But not as much substance as some other short leader class figures. He's about a head shorter than Legacy G-Axis, who was famously large for a modern Voyager. But you pick both of them up, and Springer definitely has more heft to him, to say nothing about more obvious complexity. On the other hand, he's a head and a half shorter than Kingdom Leader Galvatron, which is obviously much slimmer and lighter, so he's not quite a Voyager, and not quite a leader. One thing is he is really heavily retooled from the Siege version. His whole upper torso is basically new, save for a few bits and bobs, and the only thing on him that I can immediately peg as being from the Siege version is his lower legs. This feels like a completely new figure. In terms of animation accuracy, the whole reason for this exercise, he's not quite the perfect cartoon replica you would expect from Studio Series. Specifically, his animation models got proportions make him into this round, bulbous thing with a thick, barrel-chested torso, whereas the version is proportionate here more like a standard humanoid, slimmer and boxier. I can't say I mind. I really think his animation model would be kind of ugly in 3D space, and this is better. It's just amusing that he kind of doesn't fulfill that brief. I mean, he'd probably have to be 100% new, but be worse off for it. The one thing that does bug me visually are his new shoulder pads. They're supposed to be flared diagonally outwards in an attempt to imitate smaller ones on this animation model. But I find that they just look awkward, moving his shoulders around and puts them in odd locations, exposing a lot of his inner articulation joints. It doesn't help also that it's unclear just how far out they're supposed to go, with the animated ones being almost entirely horizontal. I leave them a bit more vertical most of the time, and it's even possible just to put them where the Siege Toys pads were perfectly straight up and down. One thing that does work though is his new head sculpt, which does accurately translate his Fluoro Dairy design mug into 3D space in a way that I find really pleasant. He's got an expression that looks like he's trying to be a tough guy, and it fits his personality. For colors, it's green. Okay, so he's got plenty of color on him, as long as you light green, dark green, kind of a milky green-white, some yellow, and some dark gray, plus the red auto brand and his blue optics. It's all very complete looking and pretty lush. I do find it funny again that in the "we must be like the cartoon" toy line, they added way more yellow to the grill on his chest than he's supposed to have. But again, I think it looks better via adding more color variety. Speaking of color variety, he had enough budget that they could sprue out most of his deco as plastic instead of paint, with most of the painted on color being the yellow accents, and some dark green on his backpack and head. I always view less need for paint as a good thing, less chance of scrapes, chips, and QC issues. Build quality is definitely one area where we've got a massive improvement over the Siege one. I remember his lower legs had problems staying together and would come apart when you posed them. I don't know how they fixed it, but it's no longer an issue here, they stay together. His feet are also a bit smaller and looser than I'd like, but I can still stand him on one leg. There is one very large disappointment build quality problem for his forearms, but it's not really visible until we get into his features in alternate mode, so more on that later. When he's just a guy, he holds together quite well. One advantage of these kinds of size class cheating guys is that they have the potential for generous articulation, and that's sort of on display here. Firstly, he's got all the good joints you'd expect from a modern mainline transformer. And when it comes to bonuses, he's got hands that can open and close mitten style on top of his swiveling wrists, and feet that don't just have ankle tilts, but forward and backwards rockers. While his elbows and knees aren't double joints, they made sure to have a broad range of motion to them. However, as much as I grouse about his shoulder pads, I appreciate that they went out of their way to make sure this shoulder articulation is both unimpeded and generous. I think the only issue I have is that his head can only rotate and barely look up and down. He's tall and he's got a lot of people he needs to look down at. Okay, features and accessories. This is where the money is, quite literally, and there's a lot of it. So firstly, he's got two entire swords, a big green one and a smaller silver one with a blue hilt. This is some crazy cartoon accuracy. The smaller one resembles the sword he uses in animation, while the bigger one changes into his copter's rotors. They seemingly just gave him two because they couldn't make the former change into the latter. Me, I like having him dual wield them. Next up, he's got guns, specifically two little laser pistols he's kept from the Siege version. They fit nicely in his hands and hold the blast effects well. You can also combine them into a singular, very long rifle like Rodimus Prime's. Next up, he's got a larger laser rifle, painted in bluish purple. It's impressively detailed and feels a little bit oversized for him, or perfectly sized if you're a wrecker leader. Speaking of that, the weirdest thing he comes with is his iconic Wrecker's Hammer, according to product copy, a little mallet that he's never literally used for anything. It's unpainted milky light green, has a groove in it for a Wrecker's faction symbol that isn't there, and really feels like they said, we have a little more money, let's give him one more thing. The second weirdest thing he's got though is a big purple mortar shell, which is somehow the largest singular accessory he has. It's specifically supposed to be the one he was loading up when he said, I got better things to do tonight than die. Which makes it about the funniest accessory because there's no clip or holster or anything that helps him hold this thing. He's basically just got to cradle it in his arms like a baby. The transformation to car mode is complicated enough that I still need instructions, and likely will for the foreseeable future. The abstract of it is simple. Fold up the chest, fold in the feet, compress the arms, do a belly flop. But there's a lot of manipulating of tiny panels, and more importantly, a lot of tiny tabs that you need to snap in just so. Very importantly, and in particular, you need to make sure that his shoulder pads peg into the back of his upper arms when you fold them back, or they won't sit right in his hands. This is also a secret tool that will help in copter mode later on. Additionally, I'm not really sure how to align all the stuff that makes up the midsection of the car, his thighs, feet, and roof. I just kind of press and squeeze until I hear a big snap. So it works, but it's a bit shaky to get there. This is a fun kind of futuristic space vehicle. It's partially a big, armored tank-like thing with a tiny cockpit providing a sense of scale. But then you have the Jetsons-esque details like these swoopy fins in the back section. It's a style clash that I really like. It's also funny comparing it to the animation model because the panels on his roof are supposed to be tinier and the fins at the back are larger. Here, they're reversed. It doesn't matter much though, it looks good here. So this is pretty big for a car mode, but still not leader class big. I'd say he compares more to Legacy Tarn. It's a panelly, complicated sculpt, mostly due to all the transformation steps, and they're having to hide his fist beneath his unfolded shoulder pads, to no avail, same with the big thighs. But it's a Cybertronian car, so it bugs me less than what it would if it was real. Meanwhile, his colors are a bit more green and a bit less gray, and some clear blue is added in the form of that tiny cockpit. He's also got painted rims on his wheels. I'll say this for his construction, as hard as it is to get everything in place, even with his robot mode feet kind of hanging there in the middle of the car body, slightly off of their tab, if there's a way to get them to line up, I haven't found it, the whole car still manages to hold together well, and even rolls on all four wheels, which pleasantly surprised me since those are usually the first thing not to work when a Transformer is this complicated. His transformation to copter mode is technically easier than robot to car, if only because a lot of the tricky work in the midsection is already done. That being said, there's just enough complicated rotational business going on with his legs here that I again needed to consult the instructions. So remember back in the transformation to car mode when I said it's really important that his shoulder pads are plugged into his upper arms correctly? That's relevant here, because those panels on his forearms that flip out, one exposes his little arm laser, form little winglets on the side of the helicopter and will not pop into place unless the shoulder pads are flush from being plugged in, because those 2 extra millimeters make all the difference.
I swear to God I had something for this.
I didn't discover this until after a long time after I bought this guy, and assumed it was just a critical design flaw with the winglets since they don't go in straight. They wouldn't plug in at all. Lastly, you transform his larger green sword into the rotors and pop it on top of him and you're done. Technically, Springer's still the size of normal Voyager mode, but he feels much larger thanks to the long tail and thick front end. Despite having the same cockpit as his car mode, he also manages to feel significantly different, which is impressive. Lots of details have been moved around and other things have their context shifted, like the rear wheels being the rear tail rotor. And it's got more of a slabby vibe to it, which is funny since this is the flying mode. I like it though, it's got very swooshable energy. There's an odd choice with the sculpt here, and it's his rotors. The blades are, how do I put this? Symmetrical? They're supposed to point in opposite directions, and it's because the sword splits down the middle, but a rational joint could have just probably fixed all this. Still, it doesn't bug me as much as I expected. Overall, I'll say one thing off the top. I think this guy justifies the leader class price point, just due to the sheer amount of stuff that he comes with, which is not something I expected to think about the accessories. As for the robot himself, I do think he's a bit too complicated for his own good when it comes to his transformations. And I feel like he's going to end up living in robot mode on my shelves because of it. And while there's a few other little issues, generally, he's pretty solid. More importantly, unlike the Siege one, he's memorable. It feels like the purpose of this retool was to implant a soul to a figure that somehow didn't have one before, and it was a complete success, which is especially surprising for Studio's Series 86 line that I've found tends to make figures that feel like soulless box checkers. So this isn't a 10 out of 10 guy. Like I said, he's overcomplicated in ways that make me shy away from handling him. But he's still overall pretty good, so I'll say this. If you don't have a Springer, get this one. If you have, like the old Thrilling 30 Springer though, this isn't really essential. And if you have a Siege one and don't like them or find them boring, forgot that you owned them, get this one.